The council chamber was quiet except for the soft hum of life support systems that kept dozens of alien species breathing in the same space. Ambassador Tellen stood at the center of the Great Hall, her forearms shaking as she held the quantum communicator. Around her, representatives from across the galaxy watched with eyes that held fear and desperation. The Krex Empire had been unstoppable. In just 3 months, they had destroyed 17 civilizations. Their black ships moved through space like hungry beasts, consuming everything in their path. Planets that had thrived for thousands of years were now empty husks, their populations gone, their resources stripped away. Tellen looked up at the massive viewing screen that showed the current war map. Red markers indicated fallen worlds. Yellow ones showed systems under attack. The green markers that represented safe territory were shrinking every day. The Krex were not just conquering the galaxy. They were eating it alive. Council leader Vorth shifted his massive bulk in the central chair. His species had ruled the council for centuries, but even they had no answer to this threat. Traditional weapons bounced off Krex shields. Standard tactics failed against their adaptive technology. Worse, the Krex seemed to learn from every battle, becoming stronger with each victory. "We have tried everything," Tellen said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Our best fleets are gone. Our strongest weapons are useless. The Krex breakthrough at the Meridian Line means they will reach the core worlds in 6 months, maybe less." She paused, knowing that her next words would change everything. "There is one option we have not tried. One species we have not asked for help." The chamber erupted in shocked voices. Species that had never agreed on anything suddenly found common ground in their horror. The humans were a forbidden topic in polite galactic society. Their homeworld was classified as a Class 12 death world, a planet so dangerous that most species would die within minutes of landing on its surface. Earth was a nightmare world, where the gravity could crush most aliens, where the atmosphere was toxic to many species, and where the native life forms competed in an endless battle for survival. The humans themselves were considered barely civilized savages who had somehow stumbled into space travel through pure stubbornness and violence. "You cannot be serious?" said Representative Korth, his tentacles writhing with agitation. "The humans are dangerous. They solve every problem with violence. They have no concept of diplomatic solutions. They also have never lost a war," Tellen replied quietly. "In 300 years of spaceflight, the human military has never been defeated. Not once. The records were there for anyone who cared to look. The humans had fought pirates, rebels, and even other human factions. They had faced impossible odds and won through tactics that other species considered insane. Their willingness to sacrifice everything for victory was legendary throughout the galaxy, but that same willingness made them dangerous allies. Human soldiers were known to fight until their last breath, to improvise weapons from debris, to turn any situation into a weapon against their enemies. They were the kind of ally that might save you from your enemies, but you could never be sure they would not become your new problem. "The Mutual Defense Protocol includes Earth," Tellen continued. "We have the legal right to request their assistance. The question is whether we have the courage to do so." The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some representatives argued that calling the humans would be worse than facing the Krex. Others pointed out that the Krex had already proven they would destroy everything in their path. At least the humans had never committed genocide against other species. Finally, the vote was called. It was close, but desperation won over fear. The galaxy had run out of options. The Krex were coming, and traditional methods had failed. It was time to try something different. Tellen activated the quantum communicator with trembling fingers. The device hummed to life, its energy signature reaching across the void toward the Forbidden's world. She had rehearsed these words 100 times, but speaking them now felt like signing a death warrant. "This is the Galactic Council to Earth Command," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "We formally request military assistance under the Mutual Defense Protocol. We are facing an existential threat that has overcome all conventional responses. The situation is dire. We need your help." The transmission crossed space at faster than light speed, carrying with it the hopes and fears of 1,000 worlds. On Earth, deep in the military command centers that controlled humanity's war machine, the message was received and decoded within minutes. The response came back faster than anyone had expected. The quantum communicator crackled to life with a transmission that carried the clipped, efficient tone that marked all human military communications. "Message received and understood," came the reply. "This is Fleet Admiral Hayes responding on behalf of Earth Command. Request for military assistance has been approved by the Terran Defense Council. Fleet deployment authorization granted. Estimated arrival time at your coordinates is 47 standard days. Recommend immediate civilian evacuation of all combat zones. Earth sends its regards. Hayes out." The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. They had asked for help, and the humans had agreed to provide it. But none of them were prepared for what that help would look like. In the days that followed, long-range sensors began picking up energy signatures from the direction of Earth. The humans were mobilizing their fleet, and the readings were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The ships were massive, their power outputs suggesting weapons that could crack planets. More disturbing were the smaller signatures that suggested support vessels, medical ships, and transport craft. The humans were not just sending a fleet. They were preparing for a war that would reshape the galaxy. As news of the human response spread through the remaining free worlds, reactions were mixed. Some species celebrated, believing that salvation was finally at hand. Others worried that they had simply traded one destroyer for another. The humans were coming, and everyone would soon learn what it meant to call the Deathworlders for help, deep in space. The Kreks continued their advance, unaware that their next opponents would be unlike anything they had ever faced. The galaxy had called Earth for aid, and humanity had answered. The price of that call was about to be paid in blood and fire. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, in bunkers that had been carved from solid rock centuries ago, the heart of human military power began to beat faster. Fleet Admiral Marcus Hayes stood before a wall of holographic displays that showed the entire galaxy, red markers spreading like an infection across the star map. The Kreks Empire had consumed 47 systems in 3 months, and their expansion showed no signs of slowing. Hayes was a man who had seen war in all its forms. He had fought pirates in the outer colonies, put down rebellions on distant worlds, and commanded fleets in battles that most species would consider impossible to win. His weathered face bore the scars of a lifetime spent in service to humanity, and his eyes held the cold calculation that had made him the most feared military commander in human space. "They move like locusts," he said to his aide, Lieutenant Commander Torres, who stood beside him studying the tactical displays. "But locusts can be stopped if you understand their patterns." The intelligence reports painted a grim picture. The Kreks used biomechanical technology that adapted to enemy weapons within minutes. Their ships were grown rather than built, their hulls healing damage as quickly as it was inflicted. Their strategies evolved in real time, learning from each battle and becoming stronger with every victory. Most disturbing of all were the reports from survivors who had escaped the fallen worlds. The Kreks did not simply conquer their enemies. They harvested them, taking entire populations for purposes that the intelligence analysts could only guess at. Whole civilizations had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only empty worlds and the lingering signatures of Kreks biotechnology. "How long since we last mobilized the full fleet?" Hayes asked. 18 years, sir," Torres replied, "the Colonial Rebellion. Even then, we only deployed 60% of our assets." Hayes nodded. The galaxy had enjoyed relative peace for decades, but that peace had been maintained by the knowledge that humanity's war machine remained ready. The Terran Defense Force had continued to build ships, train soldiers, and develop new weapons even during the longest periods of peace. Other species had called it paranoia, but humans preferred to call it preparation. Within hours of receiving the Council's message, the machinery of human military might begin to move. Orders flashed across the solar system at light speed, reaching every military installation, every shipyard, every training facility. The fleet that had been maintained at ready status for decades began to assemble. The flagship, Retribution, emerged from the lunar shipyards first, its hull scarred from a dozen previous conflicts. The massive vessel stretched nearly 2 kilometers. From bow to stern, its angular design a testament to human engineering philosophy. Where other species built elegant ships that looked like works of art, humans built ships that looked like weapons. Following the Retribution came the heavy cruisers. That would form the backbone of the battle fleet. Vengeance, Wrath, and Fury were sister ships, each one capable of reducing a city to rubble in minutes. Their hulls were thick with armor plating that could withstand punishment that would vaporize most alien vessels, and their weapons were designed with one purpose in mind: overwhelming firepower. But it was the specialist ships that truly showed the depth of human military thinking. The stealth destroyer Silence could become invisible to every known form of detection, its experimental cloaking systems allowing it to appear and disappear like a ghost. The assault carrier Havoc carried 3,000 human Marines, soldiers, who considered a 90% casualty rate acceptable losses if it meant completing their mission. Most unusual of all was the research vessel Curiosity, crewed by human scientists who had turned the study of warfare into an exact science. While other species developed their military technology through trial and error, humans approached combat with the same methodical precision they applied to physics and engineering. The hospital ship Mercy accompanied the fleet. Its medical facilities, capable of treating thousands of wounded from dozens of different species. Even in their preparations for war, humans maintained their contradictory nature. They were capable of incredible violence, but they were also capable of incredible compassion. As the fleet assembled, Hayes studied the reports from the Council worlds. The Kreks had certain patterns in their attacks, certain preferences in their targets. They seemed to favor worlds with large populations and abundant resources, but they also showed a disturbing interest in species with specific genetic markers. They are not just conquering, he told his staff during the final briefing. They are selecting. The question is what they are selecting for. Dr. Webb, the chief scientist aboard the Curiosity, had been analyzing every piece of intelligence about the Kreks since the moment their message arrived. Her preliminary findings were disturbing. The Kreks' biotechnology showed signs of incorporating genetic material from conquered species. They were not just harvesting populations, they were incorporating them into their own biological matrix. They are a parasite, she explained to the assembled officers. They consume other species to fuel their own growth. But parasites have weaknesses. They depend on their hosts. Remove the host and the parasite dies. The final preparations took 40 days. 40 days of loading supplies, briefing crews, and preparing for a war that would decide the fate of the galaxy. The human fleet that assembled was the largest military force in recorded history, but it was also the most precisely planned. Every ship had a purpose, every weapon had a target, every soldier knew their role. On the last day before departure, Hayes recorded a message to be sent back to Earth Command. "The galaxy has called for help," he said, his voice carrying the weight of command. "They are about to learn why nobody calls the Deathworlders unless they are truly desperate. We go not just to win a war, but to end a threat. The Kreks have shown that they will not stop until they have consumed everything. We will show them what happens when they try to consume humanity." The jump to hyperspace was different from the smooth transitions favored by other species. Human ships tore through space-time like bullets through fabric, their passage leaving ripples that would be detected by both allies and enemies. The message was clear: humanity was coming, and subtlety was not on the agenda. As the fleet disappeared into the void, sensors across the galaxy detected the massive energy signatures of their passage. The humans were no longer a distant threat or a theoretical ally. They were a force in motion, carrying with them the accumulated military might of a species that had never learned to surrender. The Kreks had conquered 47 star systems using the same strategy every time. Their biomechanical fleets would arrive at a target system, analyze the defensive capabilities of the local forces, and then adapt their technology to counter. any resistance. The process usually took less than a day, after which the conquest would begin in earnest. Admiral Nexthal commanded the Krex expansion fleet from his flagship, a massive biomechanical construct that had grown over centuries of warfare. The ship was more than a vessel, it was a living entity that fed on the energy of conquered worlds. Its hull pulsed with organic rhythms, and its weapons were extensions of its own nervous system. When the deep space sensors detected the approaching human fleet, Nexthal felt only mild curiosity. The sensor readings showed ships built from primitive materials, powered by simple fusion reactors, and armed with chemical explosives and kinetic weapons. By Krex standards, they were centuries behind current military technology. "Analyze the incoming vessels," Nexthal commanded, his thoughts flowing directly into the ship's bio-neural network. "Prepare adaptive protocols for primitive combat systems." The response came back within minutes. The human ships used thick metal armor instead of energy shields, relied on chemical rockets for propulsion, and carried weapons that seemed designed for close-range combat. Their largest vessel was barely half the size of a Krex battleship, and their entire fleet could be outgunned by a single Krex world killer. "Deploy standard formation," Nexthal ordered. "This will be over quickly." The first battle between humans and Krex took place in the Outer Veil, a region of space considered worthless by most galactic civilizations. The area was filled with asteroid fields, gas clouds, and the remnants of ancient stellar explosions. It was exactly the kind of terrain that most species avoided for military operations. The humans had chosen it deliberately. The Krex fleet deployed in their standard formation, a defensive screen of adaptive frigates backed by their devastating capital ships. The formation had been tested in dozens of battles against dozens of different species. The adaptive frigates would analyze enemy weapons and develop countermeasures, while the capital ships would deliver the killing blow. Admiral Hayes had studied every available recording of Krex tactical operations. He had analyzed their formation patterns, their adaptation protocols, and their response times. What he had discovered was that the Krex were incredibly effective against conventional tactics, but they had never faced an opponent that refused to fight conventionally. "All ships," Hayes commanded from the bridge of the Retribution, "implement Protocol Omega. Show them what a death world breeds." The human fleet emerged from hyperspace in a pattern that defied every principle of naval warfare. Instead of maintaining formation, they scattered like a pack of wolves, each ship taking an independent vector toward the enemy. The Krex adaptation protocols, designed to counter organized fleet movements, struggled to process the apparent chaos. The destroyer Silence struck first, materializing inside the Krex formation like a ghost made solid. The ship's experimental cloaking systems had somehow bypassed every sensor array in the enemy fleet. Its weapons opened fire at point-blank range, targeting not the enemy ships themselves, but the biomechanical nodes that coordinated their adaptive systems. The heavy cruiser Wrath followed a strategy that bordered on insanity. Instead of engaging the enemy at maximum range, it charged directly into the center of the Krex formation. Its armored hull absorbed damage that should have been fatal, while its weapons carved through enemy shields with surgical precision, but it was the human crews themselves that truly confused the Krex. While other species retreated when faced with superior numbers, human ships fought harder the worse their situation became. When their vessels were damaged, they did not withdraw for repairs but continued fighting with half their systems offline. When boarding parties breached their hulls, human Marines met them with weapons designed to cause maximum psychological impact. The battle lasted 6 hours, but the outcome was decided in the first 30 minutes. The Krex adaptive technology. Their greatest strength became their weakness when faced with an enemy that refused to follow predictable patterns. Human ships would engage at long range, then suddenly close to knife-fighting distance. They would target systems that seemed irrelevant, then exploit the resulting chaos to devastating effect. Most disturbing of all was the human approach to casualties. When the cruiser Fury took critical damage to its main reactor, the crew did not abandon ship. Instead, they turned their dying vessel into a weapon, ramming it into the largest Krex battleship with enough force to crack its bio-mechanical hull in half. The Krex had never faced an enemy that was willing to die to achieve victory. Their biomechanical technology was designed to preserve itself, to adapt and survive. The concept of deliberate self-sacrifice was alien to their thinking, and they had no defense against it. When the battle ended, the Krex fleet was gone. Not just defeated, but utterly destroyed. The humans had lost 3 ships and taken heavy damage to several others, but they had achieved something that no other species had managed. They had stopped a Krex advance cold. More importantly, they had begun to understand their enemy. The research vessel Curiosity had been analyzing Krex wreckage throughout the battle, its scientists studying the biomechanical technology with the methodical precision that characterized human research. Dr. Webb had made several disturbing discoveries about the true nature of the Krex threat. "They are not just conquerors," she reported to Admiral Hayes as the human fleet regrouped. "They are harvesters. The biomechanical technology incorporates genetic material from conquered species. They are literally feeding on the diversity of galactic life." The implications were staggering. The Krex were not just expanding their territory, they were consuming the genetic heritage of every species they encountered. The populations that disappeared were not just enslaved. They were being absorbed into the Krex collective consciousness. Hayes studied the analysis with growing anger. Humanity had always been protective of other species, despite their reputation for violence. The idea that the Krex were systematically destroying the genetic diversity of the galaxy struck at the core of human values. "Send a message to Earth Command," he ordered. "Tell them we need reinforcements. This is not just a war, it is an extinction event. The Krex must be stopped completely." The message that went back to Earth carried with it the sensor recordings from the battle, the analysis of Krex biotechnology, and Hayes' recommendation for total war. The response came back within hours, carrying the full authority of the Terran Defense Council. Reinforcements approved. Rules of engagement upgraded to total warfare protocols. You are authorized to use any means necessary to eliminate the Krex threat. Earth Command sends additional resources and wishes you good hunting. News of the human victory spread through the galaxy like wildfire. For the first time in months, the Krex had been stopped. More importantly, they had been stopped by a species that most of the galaxy considered primitive. The implications were clear. The Deathworlders were not just dangerous. They were effective, but the Krex response was swift and brutal. If these newcomers wanted to play by savage rules, the Empire would show them what true savagery looked like. 3 entire fleets began converging on the human position, led by the legendary Krex Devastator. Class ships that had cracked the shields of entire worlds. The real war was about to begin. The Krex Empire had never faced a defeat like the one the humans had handed them in the Outer Veil. For centuries, their biomechanical fleets had swept across the galaxy like a plague, consuming entire civilizations and growing stronger with each victory. The loss of an entire fleet to primitive chemical weapons and metal ships was not just a military setback. It was an insult that demanded immediate response. Admiral Nexthal had survived the battle by abandoning his flagship at the last moment, escaping in a biomechanical pod that had carried him back to Krex space. His report to the Empire's ruling council was filled with details that seemed impossible to believe. The humans had fought with tactics that defied logic, sacrificing their own ships to achieve victory, using their weakness as a weapon against superior technology. "They are not rational," Nexthal explained to the assembled Krex leadership. "They do not calculate odds or preserve their forces. They fight as if death is preferable to defeat." The response from the Empire was swift and overwhelming. 3 full fleets were diverted from ongoing conquests and ordered to converge on the human position. The force included 12 Devastator-class ships, biomechanical constructs the size of small moons that had been used to crack the planetary shields of entire worlds, but the humans had not been idle during the weeks it took the Krex to organize their response. The research vessel Curiosity had been analyzing every piece of wreckage from the first battle, its scientists working around the clock to understand the true nature of Krex. Biotechnology, Dr. Webb had made discoveries that changed everything about how the war would be fought. They are not just using biotechnology, she explained to Admiral Hayes during a secure briefing. They are biotechnology. The ships, the weapons, even the crew members are all part of a single biological matrix. They share information instantaneously across vast distances through quantum-entangled neural networks. The implications were staggering. The Krex were not just an empire, they were a single organism spread across multiple star systems. Every battle, every defeat, every victory was instantly shared with the entire collective. They learned from every encounter, adapting their strategies and technology in real time, but Dr. Webb had also discovered something else. The biomechanical matrix that gave the Krex their strength also created a critical vulnerability: the quantum entanglement that allowed them to share information instantly could also be used to transmit other things. Computer viruses, neural toxins, even simple disinformation could be spread through the entire network if properly introduced. We cannot fight them conventionally, Hayes realized. But we do not have to. We can turn their greatest strength against them. The second battle began 3 weeks after the first, when the Krex fleet emerged from hyperspace expecting to find the scattered remains of human resistance. Instead, they found a carefully prepared trap. The human fleet had positioned itself in a debris field left over from an ancient stellar collision. Using the wreckage to mask their true numbers and positions, the Krex deployed their standard formation. But this time they were prepared for human tactics. Their adaptive protocols had been updated based on the previous battle, and their biomechanical systems were configured to counter the chaotic attack patterns that had proven so effective. What they were not prepared for was the systematic precision with which the humans had studied their enemy. Every Krex ship that entered the debris field was tracked by hidden sensors, their biomechanical signatures analyzed and cataloged. The humans had spent weeks mapping the quantum entanglement networks that connected the Krex fleet, identifying the key nodes that controlled their collective consciousness. All ships, Hayes commanded, implement Protocol Pandora. Target the NETWORK nodes. The battle that followed was less a naval engagement than a carefully orchestrated surgical strike. Human ships emerged from hiding not to engage in ship-to-ship combat, but to deliver specialized weapons directly to the Krex bio. Mechanical network interfaces. The Carrier Havoc deployed its Marines not to capture enemy vessels, but to plant viral programs in their quantum neural networks. The Krex adaptive technology, their greatest strength, became their greatest weakness. The viral programs that the humans had developed did not just attack their systems, they corrupted the adaptation protocols themselves. Krex ships began receiving false information from their own networks, their biomechanical systems turning against their crews in ways that violated every principle of their technology. The Devastator-class ships, massive biomechanical constructs that had destroyed entire worlds, began attacking their own fleet. Their quantum-entangled networks had been compromised, their collective consciousness poisoned by human-designed viruses that spread through their biological matrix like a plague. Admiral Nexthal, commanding the Krex response from his new flagship, watched in horror as his own vessels turned their weapons on each other. The biomechanical systems that had made the Krex invincible were now following human programming, their adaptive protocols corrupted beyond repair. How is this possible? He demanded of his biomechanical advisors. The humans use primitive technology. They should not be able to interfere with our neural networks. But the answer was becoming clear with each passing minute. The humans had not tried to match Krex technology, they had simply found a way to turn it against itself. Their primitive understanding of biomechanics was actually an advantage, allowing them to approach the problem from directions that the Krex had never considered. The battle ended with the complete destruction of the Krex fleet, but this time, the humans took prisoners. The interrogations that followed revealed the true scope of the Krex threat and the horrible fate that awaited any species that fell under their control. The biomechanical matrix was not just a military technology, it was a form of technological slavery that absorbed entire populations into its collective consciousness. More disturbing still was the discovery that the Kreks had been harvesting genetic material from conquered species for centuries, using it to enhance their own biomechanical systems. The populations that had disappeared had not been killed. They had been absorbed into the Kreks collective, their consciousness enslaved to serve the Empire's expansion. Dr. Webb, analysis of captured Kreks biotechnology revealed something even more horrifying. The quantum entanglement networks that connected the Kreks fleet were just a small part of a much larger system. Every conquered world, every enslaved population, every biomechanical construct was connected to a central hub that controlled the entire empire. "They have a home world," she reported to Hayes, "a central nexus that coordinates their entire civilization. If we can find it, we can end this war permanently." The intelligence gathered from captured Kreks revealed the location of their home system, a region of space that had been quarantined by the galactic community for over 1,000 years. The Kreks had evolved in isolation, developing their biomechanical technology in an environment that encouraged the absorption of other life forms. Hayes made a decision that would define humanity's place in the galaxy. "We are not just here to stop an invasion," he announced to his fleet. "We are here to end a threat. The Kreks have shown that they will not stop until they have consumed everything. We will show them what happens when they threaten the survival of other species." The message that went back to Earth carried with it a request for additional forces and authorization for a direct assault on the Kreks' homeworld. The response came back within days, carrying the full authority of the Terran government. "Authorization granted. Additional fleets are being dispatched to your position. You are hereby authorized to use any means necessary to eliminate the Kreks threat permanently. The survival of galactic civilization depends on your success." As the human fleet prepared for the final phase of the war, word of their victories spread through the galaxy. The Kreks, who had seemed unstoppable just months before, were being systematically destroyed by a species that most civilizations had considered primitive. The Deathworlders were not just winning, they were doing so with a precision and efficiency that terrified both allies and enemies. The galaxy was about to learn what it truly meant to call humanity for help. The Kreks' homeworld was a nightmare made real, a planet where biomechanical technology had consumed every trace of natural life. The surface was covered with massive organic structures that pulsed with alien rhythms, feeding on the energy of enslaved populations that had been absorbed into the planetary consciousness over centuries of conquest. Admiral Hayes stood on the bridge of the Retribution, studying the sensor readings that showed the full scope of the Kreks civilization. The planet itself was alive, its biomechanical systems extending deep into the core where massive neural networks processed the thoughts and memories of billions of enslaved beings. The orbital stations were not separate structures but extensions of the planetary organism, connected by quantum entangled networks that allowed instant communication across the entire system. "It is not just a planet," Dr. Webb reported from the research vessel Curiosity. "It is a single organism that has been growing for thousands of years. Every conquest, every enslaved population, every absorbed species has been integrated into its consciousness. The human fleet that had assembled for the final assault was the largest military force in recorded history. Ships from every human colony had answered the call, their crews united by a shared understanding of what was at stake. The Kreks had proven that they would not stop until they had consumed every other form of life in the galaxy. They had to be stopped permanently. But the assault on the Kreks' homeworld would not be a simple military operation. The humans had learned enough about Kreks biotechnology to understand that destroying the planet would not be enough. The quantum entangled networks that connected the Kreks Empire extended across dozens of star systems. Unless the central consciousness could be severed from its remote nodes, the Empire would simply regenerate elsewhere. "We cannot just destroy them," Hayes explained to his assembled commanders. "We have to free them." Every enslaved consciousness, every absorbed population, every victim of their expansion is still alive within their biomechanical matrix. Our job is to liberate them. The orbital bombardment began at dawn, but it was unlike any military operation in galactic history. Instead of targeting population centers or military installations, the human fleet focused on the biomechanical nodes that controlled the planetary consciousness. Each shot was precisely calculated to sever connections without destroying the enslaved minds that depended on them for survival. The Kreks responded with everything they had. Biomechanical defense systems that had been growing for centuries opened fire on the human fleet, their weapons powered by the life force of entire civilizations. But the humans had prepared for this. Their ships equipped with experimental shielding that could absorb and redirect biomechanical energy. The ground invasion was led by Colonel Blake, a veteran of humanity's colonial wars who understood that sometimes mercy required extreme measures. His Marines moved through the alien landscape in powered armor that allowed them to operate in environments that would kill most species, but they were not there to kill. They were there to liberate the biomechanical structures that covered the planet's surface. Were not just buildings. They were living entities that had absorbed the consciousness of entire populations. The human Marines moved through these structures with surgical precision, using specialized equipment to identify and extract individual minds from the collective matrix. It was the most complex operation in human military history. Each enslaved consciousness had to be carefully separated from the biomechanical network without damaging the neural pathways that kept them alive. The process required hours of delicate work for each individual, and there were billions of enslaved beings spread across the planet. But the most important target was the central nexus, the biomechanical intelligence that had coordinated the entire Kreks Empire for centuries. Located deep beneath the planet's surface, it was a massive construct built from the neural tissue of thousands of different species, their combined consciousness enslaved to serve the Empire's expansion. Dr. Webb led the team that would attempt to liberate the central nexus, her understanding of biomechanical technology making her the only person qualified for the task. The journey to the planet's core took 3 days, fighting through biomechanical defenses that grew more sophisticated the deeper they went. When they finally reached the central nexus, what they found defied comprehension. The chamber was vast, its walls covered with neural tissue that pulsed with the thoughts of civilizations that had been absorbed centuries ago. At the center of the chamber was a massive biomechanical brain, its surface covered with quantum entanglement nodes that connected it to every part of the Kreks Empire. "It is beautiful," Dr. Webb whispered, her scientific mind awed by the complexity of the construct. "And it is the most evil thing I have ever seen." The liberation of the central nexus took 48 hours of continuous work. Rather than simply destroying the biomechanical brain, the human team had to carefully extract each individual consciousness while maintaining the integrity of the quantum networks that kept them alive. It was like performing surgery on a living galaxy, requiring precision that pushed human technology to its limits. As each enslaved mind was freed, the Kreks Empire began to collapse. The biomechanical systems that had controlled entire star systems started shutting down as their central coordination was severed. Ships that had been operated by enslaved consciousness simply stopped moving, their crews suddenly free to make their own choices for the first time in centuries. The process was not without casualties. Some enslaved minds had been so thoroughly integrated into the biomechanical matrix that they could not survive separation. Others had been absorbed so long ago that they had forgotten their original identities. But for every consciousness that was lost, dozens more were saved. When the liberation was complete, the Kreks Empire simply ceased to exist. The biomechanical infrastructure that had supported their expansion collapsed without the central coordination that had driven it. The surviving Kreks, suddenly cut off from their collective consciousness, found themselves reduced to individual beings for the first time in their species' history. The aftermath was as carefully orchestrated as the war itself. The humans did not occupy former Krek space. instead systematically dismantling the biomechanical infrastructure and redistributing the resources to the species that had been enslaved. The freed populations were relocated to suitable worlds, their genetic diversity preserved and protected. The Kreks themselves were not exterminated, but they were contained. Their remaining population was relocated to a single world, their access to biomechanical technology permanently restricted. They would have to learn to exist as individuals rather than as part of a collective consciousness, a process that would take generations to complete. When the human fleet returned to Council space, they found a galaxy that viewed them with a mixture of gratitude and terror. The Aldari ambassador Tellan, who had made the original call for help, met with Admiral Hayes aboard the Retribution to discuss the future. "You have saved us all," she said, her voice filled with wonder and fear. "But the cost?" "The cost was paid long before we arrived," Hayes replied. "The Kreks had made it clear that this was a war of extinction. We simply ensured that the right species survived. The Galactic Council offered humanity a permanent seat, recognition as a great power, and access to all the technological wonders of galactic civilization. The humans accepted graciously, but with conditions. They would participate in galactic affairs, but on their own terms. They would respect the rights of other species, but they would also ensure that no one would ever again face the choice between slavery and extinction. The transformation of galactic civilization was immediate and profound. The other species had learned that the humans were not just capable of incredible violence, but also of incredible precision. They could destroy entire empires, but they could also liberate individual minds from technological slavery. They were protectors as well as warriors. More importantly, the galaxy had learned that there were threats in the universe that required more than diplomatic solutions. The Kreks had proven that some enemies could not be reasoned with, only stopped. The humans had shown that sometimes the price of peace was the willingness to fight a war that would end all wars. In the end, the greatest victory was not the defeat of the Kreks Empire, but the realization that even the most peaceful civilizations sometimes needed guardians who understood that true peace could only be maintained through the credible threat of overwhelming force. The humans had not just saved the galaxy, they had become its conscience and its protector. The galaxy had called Earth for aid, and humanity had answered. The price of that call was the transformation of galactic civilization itself. As the other species learned that the Deathworlders were not just dangerous, they were necessary. The peace that followed would be maintained not through weakness, but through the knowledge that those who threatened it would face the full wrath of humanity.